Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show we have Richard White. He's CEO of Fathom. Welcome, Richard. Why don't you tell us about what Fathom is up to?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, Fathom is a free AI note taker for people on a lot of Zoom, Google Meet, or Microsoft Teams meetings. We're number one AI note taker on HubSpot, Zoom, and G2. Again, as advertised, we join your meetings, transcribe them, record them, and our AI writes really excellent notes for you. We also have a team product that allows you to kind of create a workspace of all your team's meetings, get alerts on them, and basically just be more productive and efficient.
So this is there have been a few of these over the years, but this is a lot more AI powered. What's different about this one?
Yeah, so it's funny. We started in 2020 before any of the current LLM revolution, and our thesis was basically we thought LLMs were going to get really good, and we thought everyone could benefit from this, not just a sales team or something like that, where historically you had, I think most of the providers were focused on sales teams or CS teams or something like that. So first ones to come out with a free version. We have paid versions as well, but most of our users are on free, and we kind of, we think that this is something everyone could use in all their meetings, not just sales meetings.
And you had an interesting story about your launch where you had quite a few people signing up, but not a lot of people using it.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to look back on that now. I think we're, by most metrics, the number one AI note taker in the space. If we look at all the Chrome installs, HubSpot installs. But when we launched 3.5 years ago, in 2021, we launched along with this new Zoom app marketplace, which is really exciting because obviously the hardest part of doing a startup, especially one that spreads virally like ours, is how do you get those first 10,000 users? And so, dealing with Bootstrap, the launching out marketplace was really exciting. And we got a ton of signups in the first month, as kind of expected. I think we got close to 100,000 signups. And I think, when the dust settled and we kind of looked at what was left after those 100,000 signups, I think we had 100 DAU. And that, I've had a lot of conviction in this company because I've been able to use this product myself since the beginning. But that was probably our biggest crisis of conviction. It's oh my gosh, we got 100,000 people sign up and only ended up with 100 daily active users. What that's an existential moment.
What do you think? What do you think happened there? I mean, I think this happens to a lot of folks. People make a big, gigantic mailing list, for example, and they get hundreds of thousands of people signed up, and then as soon as they click the launch button, they get bupkis. So what do you think happened there?
It's funny. We did an offsite a month after this, and the whole purpose was to figure out what do we make of this? Are we shutting down the company? What's happening? And one thing was obvious that we hadn't obviously invested in making our onboarding process as easy as possible, and we thought it was pretty good, but we hadn't stress tested enough clearly. And so, we sat down. Literally, it was myself and one of our core engineers, and every day we just shipped 3 improvements to the onboarding process and got our onboarding rate from 30% to 80%. So that was super helpful. But the big thing actually was at some point we were wait, how good are these signups? Who are these people signing up? And we eventually did this analysis of, how many Zoom meetings they had on their calendar in the next week when they signed up. Because obviously, the number of Zoom meetings you have or Google Meet meetings is directly correlated to how much value we can provide. And I think we found that 99% of the signups had 0 meetings on their calendar when they signed up.
Oh, interesting.
And you have to remember, this is during COVID when everyone was using Zoom for, happy hours and talking to your grandparents and stuff like that. And what we also learned is that the Zoom marketplace was originally locked down so that people on their paid plans actually couldn't access it, only free users. So we were getting kind of the most casual Zoom users possible signing up. And it was being put front and center, so making it really easy for them to click the button to sign up and get into our system. But they don't do any Zoom meetings. So, but it took us about a month or so to figure that out because we were just looking at sign up numbers. We weren't looking at the quality of the sign up.
What do you think was happening with those? Quality is actually an important indicator. What do you think was happening with those folks? They hated Zoom so much that they wanted anything to avoid worrying about it.
I mean, I think we had kind of positioned ourselves near the top of this. There's 50 apps that launched, and we kind of maneuvered ourselves. So we were like one of the first apps on the list. And so I think we just got the classic tire kick.
Oh,
where
interesting.
It's like, oh, this marketplace opened up, AI note taker by Fathom. Like, what is that? Like without even really giving a thought to it, which is interesting because such a user behavior I don't think of myself, right? I don't think about just kicking the tires on things because I know what I'm signing up for. But that's not the behavior. I think there's a lot of folks that are just like, new thing, see what it is. And we got, I think, a lot of drive-by kind of tire kicking signups.
How do you ensure that this doesn't happen again? If you were launching again, what would you do to ensure that you got some quality as opposed to quantity?
Well, we basically, that was the big takeaway. We updated all of our internal dashboards to have this, like, basically a slider that we could adjust to see, we're getting this many signups, but how many of them are like high quality signups with, 10 plus Zoom meetings on their calendar in the next week or something like that. And kind of cascade it throughout all of our internal dashboards, whether it was retention, sign up, daily active usage, et cetera.
Okay. And then in terms of just like even starting out, what are some of the best practices that you guys learned in terms of making landing pages, marketing funnels, all that good stuff? Basically just how to ensure that the people who are signing up for the right reason.
Right. Yeah. We also looked at other sources, like, how many of them are work emails versus personal emails? What Zoom plan are they on? Are they free users? Are they paid users? Because our ideal user is on a paid plan using their work email and does, N number of meetings per week. So we started looking at all those dimensions. I actually think, we went from a very simple, here's the number of signups dashboard to great, here's the number of signups and the percentage rates of paid plans, work emails, et cetera, et cetera. And then kind of like, I think in our landing pages and in the onboarding flow, try to optimize for that. So like if you try to sign up with a personal email, we'd actually kind of give you an error. It's like, hey, Fathom works best on your work email. You could keep going. You click a button, like keep going. But we start creating little like kind of roadblocks if you weren't an ideal user. And then we actually even took some of the non-ideal users and just put them on a wait list because we actually think we'd rather you not try the product if you're going to get a bad experience because you're not an ideal user, then try it. Be like, I tried it, wasn't very useful, right? And so we then set up like this waitlisting thing and start putting folks that are like, if any meetings and you're on personal email, we'll go just put you on a wait list and we'll take you off after a couple of weeks. But I don't want to create like this brand noise of people like, oh, everyone tried Fathom and no one found it useful because no one was the right target user.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So the idea that you don't want everybody on at once. What did you hear from users, especially users who might not have business accounts? Were they frustrated? Was there any pushback there? Because I think a lot of people are afraid to basically create those styrations, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, basically what they saw was like, they had kind of a negative sentiment because they didn't have a use case for the product, right? And we'd ask them, oh, what did you think? Like, wasn't very useful to me. And I almost rather them have no opinion than have the opinion of it wasn't very useful to me. I mentioned that we had been improving our onboarding process. At some point, when we were looking at like our onboarding rates, we also looked at onboarding rates by kind of these casual users versus our ICP user. And at some point, we're like, okay, there's like a 20% difference between ICP user and casual user, and we can do more work in the onboarding process. But it's not really moving up the ICP number. It's just lowering the threshold so we get more of these casual users. Great. We should actually stop making this easier, right? Like there's kind of this like sweet spot where it was like, obviously in the beginning it was too hard, but I don't want to make it so easy that it's like a single click and you're in, because I wanted you to have to jump through little hoops so that you're invested in the process, right? So we kind of persist that to this day to a certain degree.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people talk about that. I think that idea that you should make access to your product slightly difficult. I mean, that works in luxury. I guess it works in like, I don't know, musical instruments maybe, but it's hard to understand it working in software as a service, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's either find product. A lot of products are hard to sign up for, right? But some of them are frankly too easy, right? And I've seen folks who are like, they strip out too much stuff out of the sign up process and they drop you into this blank slate, and then you have a bad experience. And so we cut a lot of things out, but we said, no, we need you to do these 3 or 4 things so that when you get in there, there's some data, there's something you can do, right? It's not, I think I don't want to give you like a false sense of accomplishment, right? If there's 3 more steps you need to do to really use this thing. We had one of the steps we had you do early on was people weren't sure about recording or how to use an AI note taker on a meeting. And so we actually had a thing where you could do a test call with like a robot that we sent to the meeting. And for a while, we actually required people to do that. It's like, oh, if you won't take a minute to like, basically do the tutorial, if you will, then like, we don't think you're probably going to want to use this anyway. And we slacked off that at some point, gave you like a, an asynchronous way to do that. But I think we still always prompt you like, hey, earn 5 points, take a minute and do a tutorial call sort of thing. And unsurprisingly, the people that do that are the better half of our signups, right? Because they're willing to take that education.
Does it get frustrating enough to go through all those hoops to get the right kind of customer?
And that's where I think you have to find a balance, right? I think in the beginning we had like 10 steps, which is way too many. And I think we found everything after the 7th step, no matter what it was you started seeing rapidly, increased fall off, right? There's like a certain amount of patience people would have for you. So it's like not 0, but it's not 10 steps either. And so we found the sweet spot, which is like, I think right now we've got like 5 steps. And we also ordered the steps so that like they start with the easier ones. So like, just like, I think one of the first ones, like, what's your role, right? What's the CRM you use, that sort of thing. And so we try to basically build momentum. I draw a lot of inspiration from like video games. I think video game tutorials are generally the best onboarding out there. And, we don't give you all the tools up front, but like, cool, let me give you an easy win. You just click this button. Okay. The next one's a little bit harder. You've got to download this thing. Okay. The next one's a little bit harder. You need to connect to your CRM, right? And so I kind of think about that progression. And now once I've got you through 3 or 4 steps and increasing effort, now you're like, you're a little more bought in than if you just did 3 low effort steps and you made it through, which you wouldn't have if it was 10 high effort steps, sort of thing.
What was the process to get those first early users? What was it? Simply the fact that you got into the store early, do you think, or was there something else that you tried?
I mean, before we launched, it was the classic, like I think I pinged 800 people that were 1 or 2 degrees away from me on LinkedIn. And I said, I've got this really cool product. Can I handhold you through trying it? And I think I even offered people like 25, 50 or $100, depending on who they were, to just try it. Right? I was paying people to try it out. And so, I always tell our team, like, we worry about retention before we worry about onboarding, and we worry about onboarding before we worry about growth. And in this case, we got to a place where like, I think I manually reached out to about 800 people, ended up with like a cohort of 50 users using us every day. So I knew that like, okay, the product's sticky if I can get them in. Then we kind of launched, and again, the onboarding process, the users weren't the right users signing up, but the onboarding process was still pretty bad. But at least we had this torrent of signups that we could test, right? I think what's challenging too is a lot of people launch and you get 10 signups a day. It's really hard to have any statistical significance on where you're losing in the funnel. You just need to watch the screen recordings. In our case, we've still had thousands sign up per day. So if we ship a change to the onboarding process today, we'll know by tomorrow if it had a measurable impact. And so in some ways, all those free users were really helpful. And actually, it's funny, like a reflective, like if we had gotten 100,000 ideal users, 1, our service probably would have fallen over. We probably couldn't have actually handled that much signups. And 2, we probably would have lost 2/3 of them because our onboarding process wasn't very good. So in some ways, it was very fortunate that we got a lot of kind of, low value users to kind of cut our teeth on and really sharpen that pencil.
And what's next for Fathom? What are you guys working on now?
So, as I mentioned, like we kind of built this company before LLMs came out, and the thesis was, when they're come out, transcriptions can become free. If you wait till those 2 things are true, there's going to be a million of these things. So you need to start early, build that distribution advantage, and really build out the hard parts, which are really the recording infrastructure, like reliable recording and transcription across these meeting platforms is actually the really hard part. And then at some point, AI will get good and we'll drop it in. And it was really around, I think, late 23, early 2024 last year, where you got to like GPT-4 and Claude 2, where the AI can write better notes on a meeting than almost any human. So we got to drop that in the product, pulls out your action items, and does that really well. Now the frontier for LLM is, cool, we can look across, the hundreds of meetings you've had in the last month and basically give you a searchable index that understands emotion and understands kind of semantics. So to date, we've had like I can search all my Fathom meetings for, did anyone mention this competitor? And use a specific keyword. But now I can just ask, hey, did anyone mention a competitor in my sales meetings? I can ask, did anyone get really mad on a call?
Oh, wow.
Did anyone have a pushback on our pricing that didn't feel resolved? That sort of thing. And so there's a lot of stuff we can do now we couldn't do a year ago with kind of larger data sets, looking across all your meetings, not just give you insights on a single meeting. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the questions that I think a lot of people have about that sort of AI analysis of, say, meetings, transcripts, that sort of thing, is that actionable stuff? Like, I mean, knowing that somebody got mad on a call, do I have the context for that anger? It sounds cool on the surface, but are you able to pull the context out?
Yeah, so I think what we do is we'll pull out, here's that section of that call, and we'll have you actually double click in to see the rest of the call. And there's actually kind of a ChatGPT interface where you can actually ask follow-up questions. Basically, an AI is basically watching every meeting. You can ask it questions, right? Like, okay, this person was mad. Did this result in the sale? Was this a problem? Like, did they, so I think we're trying to give you more tools to understand what's happening across all the meetings they're not in, whether those are sales meetings or even internal ones, right? I think what I'm kind of excited about is like, everyone hates meetings, but they hate meetings for two very solvable reasons. One is we all hate the pre-work and post-work for a meeting, right? We hate taking notes. We hate filling in our CRMs. We hate logging stuff in Notion. We're kind of close to this place. We can do about 80% of this where the AI just kind of like, you speak into existence, the AI will create it for you post-call. So it's like that part's going away. The other thing we hate about meetings is we hate being in meetings we don't need to be in, right? And, I think that happened because, one time there's a recurring meeting where you should have been there to hear this 5-minute segment of it. Now you're screwed. You're going to be on that recurring meeting until the day you die, right? I think we're going to be able to do away with that because you'll be able to kind of like time shift these meetings. The AI will know, you mentioned this thing. Do you want to take this section of the meeting and forward it to John? Or you will be able to set up listening posts and say, hey, I want to know anytime anyone in the org is talking about this project in a non-sensitive meeting sort of thing. So that's kind of the two things we're excited about the future is like AI just does all the busy work for you so you can just have a discussion. And AI actually acts as a way, meetings are like the number one way we share information in an organization, but they're extremely inefficient because if you're not there for that meeting, you don't get the information. Well, that's no longer going to be true, right? You'll basically be able to have way less meetings and be way more connected to what's happening across your company.
All right, very cool. All right, so where can people find out more about Fathom?
Yeah, go to fathom.video and sign up. Again, it's free. And if you have any questions, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Is there a special link we can send people? There's no hoops to jump through now that they know about your tricks?
No hoops to jump through. They're pretty minimal, right? It's like 5 steps. So yeah.
All right.
Just go to the homepage.
All right, Richard, thank you for joining us. It's been fun.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right. This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.